The first child arrived barefoot at sundown, carrying a dented tin pail and a look that belonged on a much older face. Mara Vale saw him from the fence line where she was dragging a rotten cedar post out of the hard July ground. Behind her, the ranch house crouched in the red light, like something people preferred to discuss from a safe distance. In Bitter Creek, they called the Vale place cursed. They said the wind cried through the walls in winter, cattle went lame in the lower pasture, and every family that tried to keep the ranch ended broken, widowed, or gone. The boy stopped at the gate and did not speak. Dust had turned his cuffs the color of old bone. One suspender hung loose. His hands were wrapped so tightly around the pail handle that his knuckles shone white through the grime. Mara propped the post against her hip. "You planning to stand there until dark swallows you? Or did you come for something?" His throat worked before the words came. "They said this place was cursed." "Most folks say that from the road," she said. "You've come farther than most." His eyes flicked to the house, then back to her. "They also said cursed things don't mind ruined people." That hit somewhere deep and old. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Lonely roads feel kinder when you know who's walking them with you. Mara set down the post and walked to the gate. Up close, she saw the purple shadows under his eyes, a split at the corner of his mouth, and the slight lean away from any hand that might move too quickly. "How old are you?" 10. "You've got the look of 12 bad years." A ghost of a smile tried to reach his face and failed. "My name's Eli." "Who sent you?" He lifted the pail. Inside sat 3 eggs wrapped in a rag, a bent spoon, and a folded scrap of paper. "Mrs. Traff from the boarding kitchen. She said if any place in the county might hide a boy till morning, it'd be this one." Mara took the note. "Heard Wexler's men looking for the boy. Said he stole." "I don't believe it. If you have any mercy left in you, keep him out of town." Mara looked back toward Bitter Creek, 10 miles of dust and bad memory away. Augustus Wexler owned the mercantile, the livery, and more of the county's debt than any decent man should. Men like him liked calling survival theft when poor people did it. "What did they say you stole?" she asked. Eli swallowed. "Ledger pages." That was worse than money. A dry wind moved through the dead grass, carrying sage, and that faint metallic clang folks swore meant the place was haunted. Mara had lived with it long enough to stop naming every ghost. "Can you work?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Can you keep quiet when it matters?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you tell the truth when it costs you?" He hesitated. "I can try." Mara stepped back from the gate. "Then come through before the light goes." For a moment he just looked at her, as if kindness might be the sharper trap. Then he crossed onto the property. By full dark she had him fed with beans, cornbread, and pickled beets. He ate too fast, went pale, and vomited in the yard before apologizing for it. Mara handed him water, then sat him at the table with a bowl of dried peas to shell, because children studied better when work lived in their hands. The kitchen smelled of onion, lamp oil, and cedar smoke. He kept glancing toward the long hallway. "There aren't ghosts," Mara said. "No, ma'am. There are mice, old pipes, and boards that complain when the night cools. If you hear crying, it's wine through the laundry chute. If you hear footsteps, it's me. And if it ain't, then it's still none of your concern tonight." That got a weak laugh out of him. Once he had nearly fallen asleep over the peas, Mara spread the stolen pages across the table. Names, dates, transport fees, payments. The kind of neat columns respectable men trusted because evil looked cleaner when written in ink. She read enough to understand the shape of it. Wexler had been acquiring children from rail depots and church transfers, placing them as hired hands on outlying ranches, then charging illegal fees while pocketing wages meant for the children themselves. Besides some names were small notes. Moved, unclaimed, deceased. Unclaimed, as if a child were a sack left too long at a station. Mara's fingers went cold. Lucy had been 7 when fever took her. Her husband had died the year after. Since then Mara had learned grief changed the weather of every room. Then came the sound of hooves outside. One horse. Slow. Familiar. Mara snuffed the lamp, pushed Eli behind the stove before he could protest, and went to the door. Jonah Creed stood on the porch, hat brim low, shoulders broad, and still in the last ash blue of evening. He had once worked this ranch as her husband's foreman. He carried himself the same way he always had, quiet enough to make careless men underestimate what waited behind the quiet. "You're late to decent society," Mara said. "Then I found the right porch." His voice was rough with dust. "Wexler's riders are on Creek Road and North Road both." Mara kept the door mostly closed. "And what business is that of mine?" Jonah's gaze shifted past her shoulder, sharpening. "You've got someone inside. Maybe I have a cat." "You never liked cats." "No, but I've been known to take in strays." She slid one of the ledger pages through the crack. He read it by fading light, and the calm in him changed shape. "Hell," he said softly. "That's my reading of it too." He handed the page back. "If the boy came here, Wexler won't stop at your fence. He's never needed much excuse." Jonah looked toward the dark yard. "Then you need more than a fence. Sensible people would have fled before moonrise." Mara had been sensible once. It had saved no one she loved. She looked at Jonah. "Then maybe it's time this cursed place earned its reputation." That was how it began. The second child arrived 2 days later, hidden under feed sacks in Jonah's wagon. A 14-year-old girl named Tansy with a split lip and rope burns around both wrists. The third and fourth came together the next day, brothers who had been sleeping in the tannery loft. By Sunday, there were 7 children at Mara's table, eating like people who had not yet decided if supper was an event or a trick. Word moved fast in hard country. The Cursed Vale Ranch would hide children Wexler wanted returned, and a widow there was too stubborn to know when she was beaten. Mara made rules that first Sunday while the children watched from the table, solemn as jurors. "First," she said, "no one raises a hand in this house unless it's to help. Second, nobody goes hungry if there is food. Third, nobody asks for the worst day of your life at this table unless you mean to tell your own right after it. Fourth, everybody works according to what they can do, not according to what was done to them. Fifth, if you lie, lie only to protect somebody smaller than yourself. Even then, lie well." A little girl with hair hacked crooked at the jaw lifted one hand. "What if the curse gets us?" Mara glanced toward the ceiling where old beams creaked and settled. "Then it'll find we were here first." They laughed. Real laughter. The kind that startled even the person making it. The hard part was not taking them in. The hard part was keeping them. Deputy Pruitt arrived first, because cruelty liked dressing itself as law. He was a thin man with a yellow mustache and a habit of wiping the same spot on his badge, as if polish might make him honorable. "Mornin', Mrs. Vale," he said from the saddle. "Heard you may be harboring contracted minors." "Then you've heard more than I have." His gaze drifted toward the yard, where Eli and the brothers were carrying water under Jonah's watch. "Those boys look young for hired men." "They look fed," Mara said. "That may be what's throwing you." Pruitt produced a folded packet. "Mr. Wexler has legal claim over several children apprenticed through county channels." "Show me papers, then." The seals were real. The language was slimy enough to pass for official. Before Mara could answer, Eli took one step forward and said, "Labor ain't what they call it when they lock the root cellar from outside." The yard went still. Pruitt looked at him. "Careful, boy." Jonah moved once away from the well, hands loose at his sides. "He is being careful," he said. "You do well to try it." Pruitt studied Jonah, thought better of his next sentence, and folded the paper shut. "I'll return with proper authority. Bring a better class of it," Mara said. When he rode away, Tansy stepped out from behind the smokehouse holding a hatchet she absolutely had not been told to fetch. Mara took it from her and found the girl was shaking hard enough to rattle her teeth. That night the wind came sharp from the west. Jonah stayed to mend shutters. After the children were abed, Mara found him on the porch steps, twisting wire through a split hinge. "You don't have to keep coming back," she said. "I know. People are talking. People have to do something with their mouths." From upstairs came Tansy's low voice, singing one of the little ones down from a bad dream. "They'll come with more than papers next time," Mara said. "Yes. You still mean to be standing here when they do?" Jonah looked up then, moonlight picking out the scar at his jaw and the grief he kept buried so deep most folks mistook it for plainness. "I failed children once because I believed men with money would stop where decent men would stop," he said. "I don't intend to make that mistake again." Years earlier, he had delivered orphan boys to ranchers who promised wages and bed space. 2 frozen a locked shed on land later tied to Wexler. Jonah carried that failure like a bullet near bone. Mara sat beside him. A house full of hurt children isn't a place for half measures. He tugged the wire tight. Funny thing about broken places, he said. They're the only ones that know how to make room. By the second week, there were 11 children. Mara learned quickly who startled at boots on floorboards and who refused to sleep with the door shut. Tansy could sew. Eli counted faster than any clerk in Bitter Creek. Finn and Asa could calm half-wild stock. June slept with a blue ribbon in her fist. Mateo carved birds from peach pits and left them on windowsills like rent paid in hope. The ranch answered them, not with miracles, but with work. The kitchen garden came back first because hungry children are fierce weeders. Jonah repaired the north corral. Mara opened the abandoned bunkhouse and turned it into a schoolroom by day and sleeping quarters by night. A place people swore was dead began sounding inconveniently alive. That did not mean the danger eased. A feed crate was set on fire at the gate. Someone nailed a dead crow to the barn, with "cursed breeds cursed" scrawled underneath. The children saw more than Mara could hide, and fear moved through them like cold through thin blankets. So she made them work harder, because courage likes employment. She taught the older ones to can peaches, patch harness, and keep accounts. Jonah taught knots, trail signs, and horses. At night Mara read aloud from anything with words on it, and the children leaned toward her voice like plants to a lamp. At the end of the third week, Sister Agnes from the Red Hollow Mission arrived with 4 more children and dust from 2 counties on her sleeves. "I was told," she said while surveying the yard, "that you were either running a sanctuary or a scandal. Depends who paid for the gossip." The nun's lined face softened when June presented her with a peach pit bird. "Then I have brought you enough scandal to fill the remaining beds." 15. That number changed the weight of the air. 15 children meant flour disappearing like weather, boots to patch, fevers to watch, and no more pretending this was temporary. Jonah counted the sacks in the pantry, then the money in the coffee tin, then the distance to winter. "You won't hold through snow on faith and potatoes." I was hoping to add beans. He did not smile. "Mara, there was one way to keep the ranch afloat. Wexler wanted the south pasture and the water rights under it. If Mara signed, the house might survive. If she refused, he would come harder, with law enough to make theft sound proper." The choice sat plain between them: the last of the Vale land or the children now sleeping under her roof. Near midnight Mara found Eli on the back steps with his knees drawn to his chest. "You heard us talking," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And?" He worried a splinter loose from the step. "If he gets the pages back, he'll hurt more children. If you keep them, he'll come for this place. Seems like the sort of choice mean men enjoy setting in front of decent folks." Mara sat beside him. The night smelled of dust, water, and cooling stone. After a while he asked, "What would you have done if somebody offered your little girl back for the price of everything else you loved?" That question struck cleaner than any blow. What would you have done? Keep what was yours, or risk it for children the world had already thrown away? Tell us honestly in the comments. Hard choices sound simple only from a safe distance. Mara looked into the dark pasture. "I'd have paid anything," she said at last. "That's the truth of me. But she's gone. And the living don't deserve less because the dead were loved first." Eli did not answer, but something in his shoulders loosened. By dawn Mara had made her choice. She would not sign. Instead she packed the ledger pages into a flour sack under onions, hitched the wagon, and rode with Jonah to Mason Ridge where Judge Bellamy was hearing circuit cases. Bellamy was old, vain about procedure, and famously unwilling to be embarrassed in public. Bellamy read 3 pages and sat straighter. "These records accuse a prominent businessman of fraud, trafficking, unlawful confinement. They accuse him of profiting from children," Mara said. "The rest is detail." Bellamy removed his spectacles. "If I issue a warrant, Wexler will claim fabrication. He has allies. Then let him make that claim under oath." The judge studied her, then Jonah, then the pages again. "You understand what follows? Seizure, testimony, retaliation." Jonah spoke without raising his voice. "He's already retaliating." Bellamy signed the preliminary order. They reached the ranch at dusk and saw smoke before they saw the yard. Not wildfire. Deliberate lines. 2 straight. Jonah spurred ahead. Mara lashed the team into a run. When they crested the rise, 3 riders were driving fire toward the hay shed, while Deputy Pruitt shouted hollow warnings from beside the gate. Tansy stood on the shed roof, organizing a bucket line. Eli was trying to cut a screaming mare loose from the side pen. Augustus Wexler himself sat his horse a little apart from the flames, silver watch chain bright on his vest, as calm as a banker reviewing accounts. Property disputes turn unfortunate, he called as Mara jumped from the wagon. Fires happen. She grabbed a shovel and ran for the nearest flame front. Heat slapped her face. Smoke clawed down her throat. Bucket line, she shouted. Low to the ground. Nobody near the shed unless I say. The children moved like one body with one heart. Finn and Asa hauled water. June dragged wet sacks twice her size. Mateo stomped sparks in boots too big for him and cried while doing it. Sister Agnes swung an iron skillet at a burning board like judgment. Then the mare shrieked. Mara looked up in time to see the pen rail give way. Eli had freed one horse and gone back for the second. The animal reared, half blind with smoke, rope twisted tight around a charred post. Mara, Jonah shouted, but she was already moving. There are moments when the body chooses before fear has time to argue. Mara threw a wet blanket over her head and went through the smoke. Heat bit through her skirts. She found Eli on the ground, coughing and disoriented where the mare had knocked him. She slashed the rope. The horse bolted. She hauled Eli up by the collar and shoved him toward the gap Jonah was opening from the far side. Then a burning slat dropped and pinned the hem of her skirt. For one clear second the world became flame, trapped cloth, and the old hard thought that perhaps cursed places kept what they loved by force. Jonah came through the smoke like judgment. He did not waste breath shouting. He knelt, cut the fabric, seized her arm, and dragged her through the opening as the side of the pen collapsed behind them in a burst of sparks. They hit the dirt together. In the strange ringing after, Mara heard Wexler laugh. Not loud, confident. He believed fear had finally broken them. Jonah stood. Soot blackened his face. Something in him had gone beyond anger into decision. Wexler's riders started forward. So did 15 children with hoes, rakes, poles, 2 kitchen knives, 1 iron skillet, and the kind of fury only the once abandoned know how to carry clean. Everything stopped on that site. For the first time, Wexler looked at the ranch and did not see strays. He saw witnesses. You're finished, Mara said, her voice scraped raw. Judge Bellamy has your books. Something flickered behind Wexler's eyes. Then he wheeled his horse and ran. Pruitt followed. The hired riders went after them because men who serve borrowed power know when the lender has fallen due. They saved the hay shed by the width of a plank. Near midnight the children were asleep wherever they had fallen, on quilts, in chairs, under the table, against one another like pups after a storm. Smoke lived in the walls. Mara sat at the kitchen table while Jonah wrapped clean cloth around the burn on her forearm. You went back for him, he said. So did you. The lamp hummed between them. Outside, the yard smelled of wet ash and trampled sage. I kept telling myself this was temporary, Mara said. Just until the law woke up. Just until weather changed. Just until somewhere proper could be found. Jonah tied off the bandage. And now? She looked around the smoke-blackened kitchen, the patched curtains, the rows of bowls, the chair Eli had repaired with twine that afternoon. Now I think they've already found it. His thumb brushed her wrist, light as a promise he did not yet know how to make. After a while she said, Lucy would have liked this noise. The children. All of it. Mud on the floor. Someone always needing mending. The doors never staying shut. Jonah's gaze lowered. Mayanna would have liked it too. She always said a quiet house felt unfinished. It was the first time he had said his wife's name aloud to her since the fever took half the valley. Strange thing, Mara said softly. How the heart keeps making room in a house it once thought was full of ghosts. He looked at her in that slow, unguarded way that belongs only to people standing on the threshold of truth. I didn't come back for the ranch, he said. I came because every place else felt like surviving. This felt like maybe living, if you were in it. The kiss, when it came, was not young and reckless. It was careful. Smoke, grief, exhaustion, and gratitude braided into one quiet yes. If this part of the story is moving you, you are exactly who we write these for. A like and a subscribe tell us to keep telling stories where broken people are not the end of the sentence. The law moved slower than justice deserved and faster than Wexler expected. Within days, Bellamy's warrant reached Bitter Creek. The mercantile books were seized. Clerks turned talkative. Sister Agnes produced transfer records. 3 ranchers admitted paying Wexler for child placements. Pruitt tried ignorance until Eli identified the root cellar key on his watch chain. What destroyed Augustus Wexler was not one grand revelation. It was the pileup of small truths he had spent years assuming nobody important would ever collect. His accounts were frozen first. Then his properties were attached pending trial. Among them was the predatory note tied to the Vale Ranch. It meant Wexler could no longer force the South Pasture sale. It meant the ranch remained hers. No, more than hers. Because Sister Agnes rose with one final petition, that given the documented care, schooling, and lawful shelter already being provided on the Vale property, the court recognized the ranch as a licensed foster homestead. Judge Bellamy peered down over his spectacles. You are proposing that the so-called cursed ranch become an official children's home. Mara stood. I am proposing that children stop being treated like spare parts in rich men's fortunes. A murmur passed through the room. Bellamy looked to the benches. Women from town sat shoulder to shoulder with the schoolteacher, the blacksmith, and Mrs. Traft. Public courage is catching once someone pays the first price. Petition granted on provisional review, Bellamy said. Wexler lurched to his feet. You cannot hand property to a woman running a madhouse of strays. Mara turned to face him. Watch me. His trial took place 6 weeks later. Fraud, unlawful confinement, abuse of minors, arson conspiracy. Once one of his riders decided prison loyalty was too expensive. He lost his businesses first, then his standing, then his freedom. Men who had once laughed too quickly at his jokes found urgent reasons not to meet his eye, while deputies led him away in irons. Justice, when it arrived, did not roar. It tallied. Back at the ranch, the work of becoming a home continued. Neighbors came first out of curiosity, then duty, then affection. Mrs. Traft brought flour and taught baking accounts. The schoolteacher came twice a week with slates. A carpenter repaired the dormer for eggs and coffee. Women from Bitter Creek began leaving quilts, preserves, old coats, and once a piano missing only 3 keys. The children changed too, which is another way of saying they became more fully themselves. Tansy stopped sleeping with a hatchet under her pillow. Eli made it through a whole night with his boots off. Finn learned letters. Asa learned patience. June let Mara braid ribbons into her hair. Mateo's peach pit birds multiplied until every sill looked like hope had nested there. Winter tested them and did not break them. Pipes froze. Money thinned. One little boy took fever and came through it. There was always soup and someone to sit by a bed when the wind clawed at the eaves. In January, Jonah moved his bedroll into the bunkhouse on the excuse that frozen pump lines required a man nearby. Nobody believed him, least of all the children, who began taking bets in dried beans on how long it would take him to ask Mara to marry him. He asked in March beside the lambing shed, while holding a squalling newborn ewe. Mara laughed so hard she had to grip the fence before she could answer. She said yes before the poor creature understood what sort of family it had been born among. They married in the yard beneath cottonwoods, just beginning to leaf. Sister Agnes presided. The children stood in 2 crooked rows wearing whatever counted as their best. Tansy cried without shame. Eli pretended the wind was in his eyes. That spring they added another dormitory, because room ought to be. Children no one else wanted kept arriving. The too quiet, the limping, the troublesome, the stuttering, the ones who watched every locked door as if it might grow teeth. The Vale Ranch took them all or found honest places that would not use them up. Folks stopped calling it cursed. Then, slowly, they began calling it Mercy House. Years later the story would be told different ways. Some said a widow fought a rich man and won. Some said 15 abandoned children saved a ranch nobody believed in. Others said love came back over scorched pasture in a foreman's hat. Mara thought the truth was simpler. A home is not the place that never knew grief. It is the place where grief is handed a chair, fed supper, and told it does not run the household anymore. By the first autumn anniversary of the fire, the west pasture had come back green as forgiveness. Hay stood high. Shirts flapped on the line. From the schoolroom came 15 voices trying to land on the same hymn. At dusk Mara stood on the porch with Jonah beside her and watched Eli, taller now and steadier, show Mateo how to cast seed into fresh rows. June chased chickens. Tansy was scolding the carpenter about joist angles. Supper smells rolled from the kitchen. Every window glowed warm gold. Jonah touched the small of Mara's back. You ever think on what folks used to call this place? Sometimes. And She looked over the yard where 15 once abandoned children moved as if they had been expected all along. I think curses are just names frightened people give to places where miracles haven't happened yet. Years from that evening, when the children were grown and came back carrying babies of their own, strangers would still ask if this was the old cursed ranch. Someone would smile and say they had the wrong word. Then the front door would open, warm light pouring over the porch, and the whole valley would shine like a hearth somebody had finally learned to keep. Next time, we'll tell the story of the deaf seamstress sent west as a burden to her uncle's ranch, and the scarred cavalry doctor who learned to listen with his hands long before he earned the right to hold hers.